over the last week, Louise and I were down in Mexico on a family reunion / vacation thing, and so I kind of missed out on a lot of weird activity going on here in the United States. And I wanted to catch up, and I'd also, while I was down there, been able to read things on the internet and watch international television. And oddly enough, Fox and CNN play in Mexico. And saw Steve Cohen being interviewed more than once, and just wanted to reconnect. Professor Stephen Cohen, Professor Emeritus, New York University and Princeton University, contributing editor to The Nation magazine, author of the book Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives, From Stalinism to the New Cold War. The website for The Nation, of course, is thenation.com. Professor Cohen, welcome back to the program.
Tom, thank you. But had I your leisure life, I too would have gone home to a reunion, but in Kentucky.
Aha!
But I'm stuck here in New York.
Yeah, well, we're originally from Michigan, but this is my sister-in-law's idea, and it was our first vacation in 10 years for Louise and I. So
that's not good. I take my vacations in Moscow and Kentucky.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
All right.
So your thoughts on what the current state of affairs is between. There's two dynamics that I'm concerned about, and I'd love to get your take on. One is the dynamic between Russia, Ukraine, and Crimea, and the other is the dynamic between the administration, the Obama administration, and the Putin administration.
Right. They're connected, of course.
Yes.
Let me say something about, I think you said on the air that you'd seen me on Fox News, and you were a little surprised. It was a straight news show, and I'm not welcome everywhere, but I believe that we could be in the run-up to war. And there's only a handful of people, such as myself, who are trying to give a somewhat different perspective on this Ukrainian crisis, which has been unfolding since November, and it's gotten worse and worse and worse. So whoever asked me, would you come and say what you think? And I say, if you don't shout at me and you don't call me a Putin apologist, I think it's my duty to give my perspective.
Sure.
A few more people are coming out, but a lot of people have been in the closet on this one.
Yeah, I saw you on CNN too. I mean,
let me give you today's news,
okay,
because I think it goes to your question.
Yeah.
I said on CNN on Fareed Zakaria's show yesterday that I thought we were 3 steps from actual war with Russia for the first time in history. 2 steps from something older listeners will remember as the Cuban Missile Crisis of the early 60s. And then from there, it's 1 step to war. What are the 2 steps to the Cuban Missile Crisis? It is the following. It's being argued in Europe and in Washington by the War Party that we, the West, immediately move NATO troops to the Polish West Ukrainian border. So far as I know, they're not proposing moving NATO troops into Ukraine in the West. You know, the West is pro-West, so the country's geographically and politically divided. But you've got a lot of people running around saying that isn't so, but they're just giving a fig to the disaster of Western policy. It's a divided country, and nobody should have ever asked them to choose. If these people, and these are people I don't know that, whether I can't remember because they talk all the time, but people like McCain and the War Party here, and they're the same people who are in Brussels in the European Union, move NATO troops to the border of Western Ukraine. Remember, Poland is in NATO, so legally they could do that. What would Putin do? I believe, you remember last week, he exercised 150,000 troops. Had nothing to do with Crimea, in the sense that those troops didn't go to Crimea. And he sent them back to their bases in Russia. He would send those troops into southern and eastern Ukraine. Then we'd have the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right.
And then we'd be 1 step from war. There's 2 pieces of bad news today. Excuse me. It is reported out of the Russian news agencies, and they don't usually lie. They put spins on stories, but the facts they get straight, that NATO warplanes are landing in Poland and Romania. I don't know why. Is it symbolic? Are they there on a vacation? Or are they preparation for troop movement because troops need air cover? I don't know. The second piece of news is also reported out of Russia, but I believe it to be true. Kerry, our Secretary of State, was supposed to go to Moscow either tomorrow or the next day to meet with the Foreign Minister of Russia, Lavrov. Presumably, he also would see Putin. That would have been a good thing. As Churchill said, better to talk than fight. Kerry canceled his visit today. Now, the reason he gave wasn't terrible. He said he needed more time to prepare some documents. Fair enough. But he ended by saying that if Putin doesn't step back from Ukraine, there is nothing left to discuss at all. What in the world does that mean?
That's an ultimatum.
It has two meanings. It means we're not talking, we're arming, and we're mobilizing. I don't know what it means, but I'll tell you one thing. The Russians don't like public threats, and Putin in particular, not from Secretary of State or Kerry or the White House. And therefore, they are going to put the worst personal interpretation on what Kerry said. So that's where we stand as we talk.
Wow. Now,
you probably want to go back to New Mexico, right?
Yeah.
Tell me something. When I grew up in Kentucky, we had those yellow nuclear fallout shelters.
Right.
Are you too young to remember those?
No, I was born in 51. I remember it well. I did duck and cover in elementary
Absolutely.
school.
We got
56.
under our wooden school chairs and put our hands over our head, and we were going to be okay. Well, I said to my wife, maybe we should go down to Kentucky and see if my dad's nuclear fallout shelter is still on the property down there.
Yeah, my dad actually, at one point, we had a basement in our house in Michigan, and he was talking about putting a plywood floor above it and putting enough dirt on it. Apparently, dirt insulates from radiation. I mean, everybody was terrified.
It was a wonderfully innocent time.
It was in some ways, yeah.
I think you can run from radiation poisoning.
Right, exactly. Question.
Yep.
We might be, we're threatening to cite troops in Poland.
We're not threatening. It's being discussed and proposed publicly. I don't know that threat. Now, privately, I don't mean me or you, but the White House in Brussels. So I think this is now in the hands. Remember that Obama farmed the whole Ukrainian question out to the European Union.
Right.
They completely screwed it up. They won't admit it. They're just blaming Putin. But now the White House has to take it over. So if the White House is talking about this, moving NATO troops to the border of Ukraine, and I would guess they are, nonetheless, they aren't saying it publicly. Now, whether they threaten Russia, I don't know.
But Professor Cohen, when the Soviet Union dissolved, my recollection is that Mikhail Gorbachev made a deal with George Herbert Walker Bush that NATO would not solicit Poland. And
this is true.
And I believe that Bill Clinton broke that deal.
No, it was worse than that. What Baker said, he was the first George Bush's Secretary of State.
Right.
And the issue was the reunification of Germany. This was 1990-91, because divided Germany was the epicenter of that Cold War. Everybody wanted to reunite Germany, even Gorbachev, but it was a tough sell in Russia, where the Soviet Union had lost almost 27 million people in the war against Germany in 41-45. Gorbachev told them, I've got to take something home. What about NATO? And they said, we've got to unite NATO. What about NATO, but what about Germany? Is Germany going to be in NATO? And the West said, we've got to do that. There's no way to have, if we reunite Germany, the whole of Germany has to be in NATO. And what then? And Baker said, and the German foreign minister was there, and so was Condi Rice, who wrote it in her book before she became a mucky-muck, before she became Secretary of State. Baker said, we will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. Today, NATO is on Russia's borders in the Baltics.
Right, which they have to view with a jaundiced eye. We'll be back. We have you for the half hour, correct, sir?
How long do you want me?
Another 15 minutes, if we can?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Stephen Cohen, Professor Stephen Cohen will be right back with us. TheNation.com.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
What is going on in Ukraine? And what could it mean to the United States? More after this. Welcome back. We're talking with Professor Stephen Cohen of New York University, Princeton University, a contributing editor to The Nation magazine and author of Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives, and TheNation.com for his most recent piece. Professor Cohen, I wrote a book recently called The Crash of 2016, which was really sort of an analysis of how the Powell Doctrine has played out in the United States, the Powell Memo. But one of the things that had been brought to my attention that I included in the book was that roughly every 80 years we experience this cycle, and it's basically we learn a horrible lesson, we stay smart for 60 years, then the people who were young when that lesson was learned start dying off, and we get stupid again for 20 years, repeat the mistake, and it starts all over again. And so 80 years ago, we had the Great Depression followed by World War II. 80 years before that, we had the Great Depression of 1856, followed by the Civil War. 80 years before that, there was the Great Crash of 1770, followed by the American Revolution. And you can keep going in these 80-year cycles all the way back to the War of the Roses. This is something that Howe and Strauss really go into a lot of detail about in their book, The Fourth Turning. And in my book, I was suggesting, this crash could very easily lead to war because they always have in the past. And, kind of military gaming or mind gaming scenarios. What do you think about that? As, the world is in a horrible situation economically. War seems to benefit the elites at the very least and ultimately puts back together economies. Or is that just totally crazy stuff?
Well, it's obviously not totally crazy. You probably have to factor in expanded life expectancy of generations now.
Right.
Because, wise people used to die at 60, now they die in their 80s, so that might fit your cycle.
Yeah.
I resist, because it lets our leadership and our elites off the hook, that somehow things are predetermined by anything. Mm-hmm. What we have in the Ukrainian crisis is a classic example of the collapse of political leadership and elite-making policy. There are people who blame the American and the Russian people. None I've ever met want this, but the elites want it for their own reasons, whether it's mendacity, whether it's stupidity, whether it's greed, whether it's power, I don't know, but it's too late to sit down and figure out how they led us to this. The question is there a way out? There is a way out. There's a way out of the war danger. There's a way to creatively eliminate this crisis and maybe create a stable Ukraine, which is the buffer between Russia and the West. The question is, where is the leadership? We have demonized Putin to the extent that he has no legitimacy in the United States. Henry Kissinger wrote in the Washington Post, I think on March 3rd, as a kind of memo to Obama, demonizing Putin is not a policy. It's an alibi for not having a policy. I would just amend that to say it's an alibi for having a wrong-headed policy for 20 years since, to return to your earlier point, we began breaking our promise to Russia to expand NATO to Russia's borders. If that continued, we were bound to come up into a war zone, as we did in Georgia in 2008 and as we have today. The question is, where's the leadership?
Right. It's a tough one. Professor Stephen Cohen with us. We'll be right back with more with Professor Cohen. It's 20 minutes past the hour. You can read his writing most recently over at thenation.com. And we'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Professor Stephen Cohen on the line with us, Professor Emeritus at New York University and Princeton University, contributing editor to The Nation magazine and author of Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives from Stalinism to the New Cold War. You can read his most recent piece, Distorting Russia, over at thenation.com. Professor Cohen, arguably much of what we're seeing play out in Ukraine began with some sharpshooters on the top of buildings killing both police and protesters some weeks or months ago. And there have been claims and counterclaims that these shooters were there on behalf of the Ukrainian government, or they were there on behalf of, extreme rightists, or maybe even, tomorrow Michelle Bachelet is installed as president in Chile, and there's some evidence that ITT back in the day, when Pinochet overthrew Allende, that there was murder of civilians that was to be blamed on the government that was actually funded by one of our corporations. And I noticed that back in November, one of our largest oil companies cut a multi-billion-dollar deal with the Ukrainian government for oil exploration.
For fracking.
Yeah, for fracking, exactly, because there's a lot of coal shale. What's the latest state of the art of knowledge about who those shooters were, where they came from?
Let's say why it's important. Yeah. I'm not a conspiracy buff, but I believe that dark forces operate where we can't see them. The crisis began, to be clear about this, in November, when Europe unwisely imposed on a profoundly divided country, divided between Russia and the West, an ultimatum: join Europe, economic zone, or join Russia's. What Europe should have done is what Putin proposed at that moment, but of course you can't defend Putin or you get Putin bashed the way I have been. He said, why is it either or? Why can't we both help Ukraine out of this crisis, and later we'll decide if membership in both zones, economic, is compatible? And that was rejected. That set off the crisis. Now, on February 21, the European ministers went to Kiev and they brokered a compromise. The president, whom they recognized as legitimate, Yanukovych, signed with the opposition leaders an agreement for early presidential elections in December. And Yanukovych agreed to amnesty all of the people who had been arrested during the protest. And there were some other agreements. That might have been a way out, but it died the next day. And one reason it died is somebody was killing people in the streets from the top of buildings with high-power sniper rifles. It was said at the time that those belonged to the government of Ukraine. Yanukovych, a mob moved toward the presidential palace. He's a cowardly man, but he knew what happened to other leaders in such situations, and he fled to Russia. Putin is now saying that's where conversation should begin, on the agreement that Yanukovych signed, because he's the legitimately elected president of Ukraine, and that Europe signed off on. But you can't turn political history back. But it is important to know whose snipers there were, though they were. The Estonian prime minister, and there's no country in the world more anti-Russian than Estonia, told the foreign minister of the European Union that he was deeply worried because those snipers were not from Yanukovych. And he said he was worried that some of the protesters in the streets were behind those snipers. He didn't go on to add what he was thinking, that the protesters in the streets include a quasi-Nazi movement, a fascist movement that's long been in Ukraine, and which now has 5 members in the new Kiev government. That's alarming, to say the least. Whose snipers they were, I don't know. But you're right, that was a tipping point. That plunged us toward the war zone that I'm talking about. Because had the February 21 agreement held, it would be unstable, but everybody would be organizing to win the elections of December 2014, not arming themselves. And Putin would not have taken over Crimea.
So the day could come when we look back and say that was the Archduke Ferdinand moment?
That's right. And to include with your cycle of histories, everybody's pointing out we're on the 100th anniversary of the beginning of World War I. And that we stumbled into World War I. And are we stumbling into World War III now with madness and mendacity and prejudice and an unwillingness to listen? Because what we have now, unless they're talking someplace quietly where we can't see them, the deaf talking to the deaf. Rhetoric is escalating in Moscow and in Washington. The clamor for war is growing. Now, a number of parties, but not the United States, has called for an investigation of that sniping incident because they agree that was the tipping point. But what if it turns out to have been done on the part of people who are now members of this government in Kiev, which we have embraced?
Right, you have to ask who benefited.
Well, if you went with who benefited, then the anti-Russian forces, the anti-Yanukovych forces benefited,
right,
because when you shoot 80-some-odd people in the head, or the number wasn't that high, but when you shoot people dead in the streets from buildings, and the finger points at the president, he had to flee.
Yep.
He had no choice. Once he fled, the Constitution was done. The extremists didn't come to power, but they came to power sharing. They're sharing power now. And Obama unwisely keeps declaring that the government in Kiev is legitimate, even though it overthrew the Constitution. It has no electoral basis in law or reality. Now, they're called elections for May, but are we going to get to May?
It's a good question. We only have about 20 seconds left. Do you think we're going to get to May?
I'm a leadership guy, Tom. I mean, we need leadership. The key role here has to be played by Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, because Putin doesn't trust Obama. He trusts Merkel.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, she has, made noises that...
Well, she's in a vice. I mean, that's another program. Where is Germany in all this? It's terrible for her. But we'll see. I mean, it's leadership. It's time to step up.
Yeah. Remarkable stuff. Professor Stephen Cohen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
It's a pleasure. You can check out his book, Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives from Stalinism to the New Cold War, his most recent piece for The Nation magazine, Distorting Russia, how the American media misrepresent Putin, Sochi, and Ukraine, at thenation.com.